Hey, I'm the Drink Pro. Today we're drinking Knob Creek 25th Anniversary Edition. What's up, everybody? Kyle the Drink Pro here with you yet again. Thank you as always for watching. Today, things might look a little different. They might sound a little different because this is my last video being filmed in my current studio space. It's been a lot of fun to do these videos for you guys here. I'm moving to a new home, and with that will come a new studio space. I'm also going to be using a new camera that I just recently purchased, so a lot of big changes are coming to the Drink Pro channel. I am hoping that you guys will follow me along on this journey. It's going to be a lot of fun. Please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the bell for notifications. Also, if you want more updates on the development of my studio, go check out my Patreon channel, patreon.com/thedrinkpro. Today we've got a fun pour of Knob Creek. Knob Creek is a whiskey that most people are familiar with. It's one of the big four small batch bourbons that are coming out of the Jim Beam distillery. And I'll talk a little bit more about the history in a minute, but I want to shout out Ken, one of my friends from the I Drink and I Know Things whiskey podcast. They make a really cool podcast. You should definitely check them out pretty much anywhere you listen to your podcast, and they also have a video version on YouTube. Definitely go check it out. I think they just started their second season. Ken was kind enough to send me this 124 proof version of the Knob Creek 25th Anniversary Edition. And that's kind of significant because Knob Creek is not something that is typically released at cask strength. In fact, the 25th Anniversary Edition was the first release of Knob Creek at cask strength. Now, as I said earlier, Knob Creek is one of the four major brands in the small batch collection of Jim Beam's profile. This was a collection that was developed by Booker Noe, who I believe was the 6th generation master distiller at Jim Beam. He created the Knob Creek line, the Booker's line, the Baker's line, and Basil Hayden. And all four of those were designed to sort of target different profiles, different drinkers. You know, the Booker's, which you can see behind me, are all very high proof barrel strength whiskeys, usually between 6 and 7 years these days, whereas the Basil Hayden was 80 proof. It was lower, easier to drink, smoother, and maybe more targeted towards your Canadian whiskey market. Well, the Knob Creek was still very much in the Jim Beam warehouse in terms of profile, but it was with an older age statement. So they wanted older whiskeys, which even at the time were relatively uncommon compared to newer whiskeys. People didn't have the palate for old whiskey like they do today. Although it's become more and more common, in the early 90s it was still relatively uncommon. In the 80s, Elmer T. Lee had developed Blanton's single barrel bourbon. It was the first single barrel bourbon. It was very expensive. It was a premium bourbon, which people didn't think would work, and sure enough, it took off. And it was sort of from that Booker Noe took inspiration and said, we can do something similar. We can do a super premium whiskey, which is how he came up with Booker's, and we can do a whole line of unique one-off or very small batch versions, hence the small batch name. Now, small batch doesn't actually mean anything. It's not a legally defined term. Million barrels could be small batch if you make a whole lot of barrels, but it is a great branding technique. It makes it feel exclusive. It lets you charge a premium price. And I think there is actually a value to thinking about small batch with companies like this because it tells you that they're trying to do a specific thing. I almost hear niche when I hear small batch, like it's a targeted audience. It's not for everyone. Well, Booker Noe retired as the master distiller from Jim Beam in 1992, but just before he left, in 1992, he created Knob Creek, the last of the four versions of the small batch whiskeys. Now, 25 years later, in 2017, Fred Noe, his son, the 7th generation master distiller, decided to pick out some special barrels of Knob Creek and then release them at cask strength as single barrel expressions. So these are hand selected by Fred. This is a relatively small run of whiskey. They're all single barrels at cask strength. These are uncut Knob Creeks. It's time to taste Fred's Uncut Knob. Now, these barrels varied in age between 12 and 13 years, and like I said, they were specifically hand-picked by Fred Noe. The proof tended to vary between 120 and 125 proof, and the price at the release was $130. Now, one of the things I hope to do today is compare the store pick version of a Knob Creek around this age statement to the single barrel proof expression that came out with the 25th anniversary. Part of the reason I'm curious is because these store picks can usually be found for between $40 to $60. So if you're going to pay $130, it better be twice as good, right? Well, maybe not, but I want to see if you're paying for the extra fanciness of a box or the extra limitedness of this release that was only happening one time, or if you're actually getting your money's worth in the bourbon. So we're going to go ahead and pour out the Knob Creek 25th Anniversary Edition. Big shout out once again to Ken. And what I've picked to compare it up against is a 14-year store pick, a little bit older than the 12 and 13 years of these barrels, but it is one of my favorite store picks I've ever had from Knob Creek. So I have pretty high expectations for it, and I think it's going to be a really fair comparison, because if I like these even similarly, then that tells me it's going to be one of the top tier pours of Knob Creek. Now today we're going to start with the Contender, and I'm going to be brief about it, but I want to go in proof order. I don't want the high proof version, which is only slightly higher proof than the 60% alcohol store pick. But I don't want that proof to play any role in whether I feel there's too much flavor, not enough flavor in any of these whiskeys. Now, one of the reasons I really like this store pick is I get a lot of citrus, bright, cinnamon, lemon, blueberries. It is very bright, sweet, floral, and fruity, which is not really what you always expect from Knob Creek. So this might be a little bit more off-profile than your standard Knob Creek pick. And maybe that's why I like it more. That might actually make it a difficult comparison with the 125th. Vanilla really starts to set in as you smell it more and more. A lot of those citrus notes tend to calm down, so it sticks more in this cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, raw vanilla, vanilla bean, and maybe even some blueberries and raspberries. The berry note still stays very prominent on the nose. From a 14 or 15-year-old Knob Creek, I expect more oakiness, I expect more pepper, I expect more nuttiness on the nose. This doesn't really give me much of any of that. All right, let's taste it, and then we'll move on to the 125th. This pour doesn't really taste like it smells until the third or fourth taste. The first taste, you just get tons of oak right out of the gate, and a lot of black pepper, especially when you haven't had anything else to drink that day. That 60% alcohol hits you right in the back of the throat. This is why you gotta taste things multiple times to really make sure you're getting a sense of what is in the pour. But the third and fourth taste starts to bring out this sour cherry flavor, starts to bring out a little bit of the honey and the herbalness in a way that is comparable to the baking spice on the nose, but doesn't really have that sweetness of the baking spice on the nose. It's definitely more earthy, more oaky. I mean, really, when you're getting down to the bottom of the glass on something like this, it is lots of unique flavors all kind of wrapped together. This is a really beautiful single barrel expression. This is why I say it's one of my favorites. It starts off like almost an oak bomb. It really takes you through your paces, because in the middle it becomes herbal, it becomes slightly fruity, slightly floral, but they're very subtle. And then near the end here, I'm getting much more of like a cashew kind of vibe, and there's a sweetness and a nuttiness coming together with a hint of that vanilla kind of underpinning all of the things. Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful expression, complicated, layered. It's gonna be hard to beat that pour at a more than double price point, but we're gonna give it a shot. This is the 25th anniversary Knob Creek. Ooh, okay. So first up on the nose, there's no comparison. They're totally different. The store pick is very fruity, very floral, but this is right in the classic Knob Creek wheelhouse. Matter of fact, the smell of this reminds me of a lot of those older whiskeys. It's got that super creamy, caramelly, almost toffee note on the nose. If you're a big fan of Dusties, this is really that kind of vibe. This is the closest thing I've smelled to a dusty bourbon, something like the Old Grandad's that I recently tasted. That old version of the Old Grandad, it has a lot of similarities with this in terms of that big, creamy sweetness on the nose. Interestingly, yeah, there's a lot of similarities between this and like a Dusty. This whiskey is, from 2017, so it's not a Dusty yet, but my goodness, if you poured this blind for somebody and you told them this was from the 80s or 70s, they would almost certainly believe you. I may get like a touch of clove or a touch of black tea, but really up front, in your face, tons of vanilla, butterscotch, caramel, toffee, and maybe a slight peanut, I would say. This is just like what you want Knob Creek to smell and taste like. It is the ideal version of that profile you're getting from Jim Beam. That's what this is. There's nothing off profile, there's nothing unusual, there's nothing off-putting. It's sweet, it's creamy, it's slightly nutty. It is bourbon. Wow. That finish lasts forever. Oh, I get a nice Kentucky hug, and it lingers on the tongue. And remember, this is only 2% more alcohol than the store pick I just had, but it doesn't have nearly as much bitter, harsh, oaky dryness on the finish. And again, it's only like 1 year younger. So it's not like, you know, there's a big separation in terms of age here. Now, I will say, this is not nearly as sweet as the store pick. All of that sweetness is just totally gone. It is immediately herbal, earthy, nutty, and then a very long finish. Lots of oak, lots of black pepper, but nothing is too sharp. It's incredibly well balanced, even though it doesn't really have some of the notes that I tend to like personally. I do think that's the one place this pour actually does fall short. It smells like some of those bourbons of old, where they had so much sweet creaminess on the nose, but it kind of has the opposite effect on the palate. It doesn't have that rush of sweetness at all. A lot of the older whiskeys I've had a lot more sweetness than this does. And although their finishes suffer, and this finish is very long and interesting and complex, I personally like a sweeter whiskey. I like sweet bourbon, I like fruity notes, I like caramel notes. This is really the ideal bourbon for somebody who likes herbal, slightly nutty, and oaky, and creamy. If you like those 4 notes in a whiskey, get the 25th anniversary of Knob Creek and you will not regret it. Yeah, I get leather and walnuts and maybe a touch of potpourri. There might be a hint of floral in there, but really, this pour lives in the earthy world, the nutty world, and the oaky world. And it kind of bounces between all of those flavors over and over again. Like I said, it's incredibly complex. It's very smooth, which is not a dirty word, albeit some people might try to claim it is. Smoothness is a function of the experience of tasting it. And while it's not a tasting note, it is an experiential note. This is somehow towing the line between incredibly complex and not particularly jarring, which is such a difficult tightrope to walk. So I must say, although it's not my preferred profile, is it worth twice the price? It might be, if only because you can see so much more complexity, which I often believe contributes to cost along with rarity. It's much more complex. It really does sort of hit these perfect ideal notes for an old whiskey coming out of the Knob Creek, coming out of the Jim Beam line of whiskeys. If you like what they are making and you want more oak and more age and more time on it, this shows you exactly what that is supposed to be. So Fred made this to honor his father Booker, and I think he did a damn good job because Booker wanted this line to be the aged, older expression of the Jim Beam profile, and that's exactly what it is. All right, guys, I gotta get out of here. I gotta start moving all these bottles and setting up my new home. I'm going to be changing some of the videos a little bit. I'm going to be adding some new kinds of content in the future, so please stay with me. And if you want to know more about how things are changing, please check out the Patreon, patreon.com/thedrinkpro. Thank you all for sticking around, and you keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.